Well, let's move on to our next topic here, talking about some of the ructions and currents in the politics of First World, Global North, whatever you want to call it, America, Europe, Canada. I guess it includes Australia and some other ones too. Either way, to illuminate all of this, we are very, very happy to be joined here by Vijay Prashad, Executive Director of the Tricontinental Institute for Social Research. As always, Vijay, thanks so much for being with us.
It's great to follow Abu Bakr, and I quite agree that he is such a delightful person, so representative of the incurable hope, as Mahmoud Darwish said, incurable hope of the Palestinian experience.
An amazing phrase, actually. Wow, there's so much I could say, but let's stay on the topic here. Recently at Tricontinental, you all put out a great dossier, The False Concept of Populism and the Challenges Facing the Left, a conjunctural analysis of politics in the North Atlantic. I think a real good compass, if you will, to help navigate where we are in the U.S., Europe, other places. And, Trump is back. Trump is the president. He's been elected. As you know, Vijay, the U.S. political discourse is, this sort of populism as a very bad thing. It's sort of negative to really challenge the sort of establishment and the status quo. And it's, in a way, I'm curious if this is not to say Trump is good, but to what degree does the fact that sort of on the right and the left, there's more of a challenge to the neoliberal status quo, what does that say about where the world is, now in 2025, a quarter of the way into this new century?
Well, it's a great way to put this question, and you're experiencing Trump in real time. I mean, some people said the other day when he decided to freeze federal funds that it was a coup d'etat. In fact, it's interesting, and I think that's a good place to start, because what this far right of a special type, that's what we call it. We stay away from more inflammatory terms like fascism, because in a way the term fascism closes the conversation, and then you just have to fight them. You don't need to understand them. But this far right of a special type is quite interesting, because unlike the fascists, they understand that the system within state institutions enables them to go as far as they can. They are going to use the state institutions as far as they can go. If it's legal to fire people, they're going to fire people. If it's legal to stop money going to organizations whose ideas they don't like, they're going to do it. If you take them to court, go ahead. And they challenge the weak-kneed neoliberals to take them to court. And of course, the neoliberals don't. I watched part of the hearing where Robert Kennedy was being grilled by the Democrats. I thought, Robert Kennedy is an own goal. You don't have to try very hard to show that this guy has some pretty nutty ideas, yeah? But here they were, basically fumbling their way through Robert Kennedy's hearing. I was surprised to see Bernie Sanders wasting his time with pictures of onesies on the screen, saying, are you selling these onesies? Or what's her name from Massachusetts, Elizabeth Warren, going on and on about how, asking Mr. Kennedy, are you going to benefit from your job? When there's so many other things you could ask them about how they use power to the limit and constrain the freedom of people. So what the far right of a new type is doing, rather than shaking up neoliberalism, is that they're using whatever authoritarian instruments the neoliberal period has bequeathed them, and it's bequeathed them a lot, to basically go after people, to go after migrants and so on, to rile up the population, but not challenge the structures of neoliberalism. And that's, I think, where the conventional center-left and the liberals miss the point. They want to see these people as cut from a different cloth. Fascists, populists, whatever. In fact, these are neoliberals who are actually able to rile up the population on other issues, on issues such as immigration. But where has Mr. Trump actually gone after the structures of neoliberalism? He's not coming in and saying, let's rebuild the social welfare state. It's not on the agenda for him. It's not even there, not even helping his own so-called constituency, what he claims is his constituency. So that's really what we were trying to nudge, that in fact these people are not rattling the neoliberal cage, which of course the left would like to see happen.
Speaking of the left, I want to ask you a question about the best response to this. But Vijay, something that is so upsetting about this fake populism is the way it's actually worked on some people. Not everybody. I don't want to say everybody or even a majority of people, but a significant enough chunk of the population of average people have bought into the idea that like someone like Trump freezing federal funding, which ends up cutting off Medicaid for a bunch of people, is somehow sticking it to the man. Basically, like they've done a good job conning a big enough chunk of the population into believing that despite the fact that they're just pulling more money out of everybody else and pushing it up to the top, that they're actually messing with the system and hitting back at like the big guy. So I guess all that's to say, how is the left supposed to fight back against that? Because one of the biggest issues we have is billionaires are running the media, right? Like the vast majority of media outlets are owned by really, really wealthy people who push this narrative that the far right is populist, when it's just not true. So how are we supposed to challenge that effectively when we're up against so much?
Well, the first thing to bear in mind is across Europe and the United States, the largest constituency in any of these countries, the increasingly largest constituency, are people who no longer vote or who vote without any interest. Or who basically don't really care about the political system at all. They may vote with some interest, but they don't have any faith in the political system. The largest constituency has given up on the politics of their countries. I think that's the first thing to bear in mind. If you want to understand where the people are, they are actually not the people at the Trump rally. They are sitting at home going, there's no hope for us. And somehow you have to rekindle hope for them. The second thing is that these political and electoral systems are really rigged against the poor. In many of these countries, we found voting day is not a holiday. Voting centers are far from where people work. There is a lot of class voter suppression. People can't get the day off. They don't have the means to take buses during the lunch break to go and line up for hours on end and so on. This is a class suppression of the mandate. And I think this is very rarely talked about. There is, I think, the important conversation about race-based suppression, the suppression of the black vote in Ohio and so on. But it's not just the black vote, it's the working class vote. It's people who are at their minimum wage, precarious jobs. They just don't have the means to get to the ballot. A very large number of people have been utterly disenfranchised in this system. Now, it's also true that there is some excitement when you hear, say, somebody like Mr. Trump come out there and say a bunch of outrageous things. But then also it's rather disturbing. A plane goes down, hits a helicopter in Washington, D.C., and Mr. Trump blames minorities. I mean, there's nothing exciting about that. I don't see millions of people darting to the streets with signs saying, get rid of minorities from the air traffic control and so on. I don't think these are quote unquote popular sentiments, but these will be sentiments that Elon Musk and others will transmit through their very large megaphones. It's important to bear in mind when somebody like Elon Musk says that, we need to get people out who have a different culture, get them out of the United States. He was born in South Africa. He was born under apartheid culture. I suppose he would feel quite happy in the Jim Crow South, but I'm very much hopeful that the United States has gone past the Jim Crow experience at that depth at least, and perhaps his South African apartheid experience doesn't qualify him to talk about other people's culture being welcomed or not in the United States, but he gets to shape what the news is. People like him, people like Bezos and others, they own big newspapers, the Murdoch family. So I think they have silenced the very large, to quote from Richard Nixon's silent majority, who don't have the ability to build a political life in the global north. We find that not only in the United States, but across Europe, the sentiment among the majority of the people that, man, I just don't have a political life any longer. I'm just trying to survive. I'm hustling to survive. I don't have a political experience. I think that's really where the attention should be paid, not to things like populism, which anyway was a concept born in the United States to disparage the agrarian rebellions of the 19th century, which rose up to stand with farmers against bankers and so on. That was a term of disparagement in the 19th century. And now it's used by liberals as a way to disparage the far right of a special type because they don't have an argument against them. They are not able to argue against them on the substantial issues. Who speaks for the worker who can't get to the polling booth? Certainly not the Democrats and definitely not the Republicans.
Well, real quick before we let you go, you quoted Richard Nixon, so I'll raise you one here, Andrew Breitbart, that politics is downstream from culture. But I say that to say because, what is the connection between, a political fight back and also rebuilding the combativity of the working class? Because that's the other thing that I feel is so absent when we think about sort of the historical scene of opposition to the right is, as you say, the sort of opposition in the workplaces in the streets.
Well, Eugene, you can't build socialism without a society. If you don't have a society, you can't build socialism. Much the same with the political fight back. The working class communities in the global north have suffered from great attrition. The old union halls are gone, the places where workers would come on weekends, where they would hold the weddings of their children. The community of the working class has been damaged in terms of the presence of the institutions. That doesn't mean that the working class doesn't gather on the streets or gather in various other kinds of spaces, religious institutions at the very top of the list. But the culture of the working class has taken a real hit. I mean, you can't have working class culture without robust unions and robust union leadership that understands that unionism isn't just bargaining. Unionism is about building the culture of the working class. I remember when Andy Stern and others decided, well, the way to build union culture was give every union member a purple t-shirt, and that's the culture. No, Andy, that's not how you build trade union culture. You build trade union culture by having picnics, by having gatherings, by having the workers in a neighborhood know each other, trust each other, give each other confidence to come onto the street and fight for their views. You can't have socialism without society. You can't build working class politics without working class culture. It's really, really difficult to do that.
No, I think that's a very good point. And, perhaps if people want to gather and create some culture, they can start by doing a collective reading of dossier number 83 from the Tricontinental Institute, The False Concept of Populism and the Challenges Facing the Left. Fantastic. Great to read with, great to think about. Vijay, as always, thank you so much for joining us here on the Freedom Side.
Take care of yourselves.